War of words has erupted between famed presidential journalist Bob Woodward and the president himself. Listen to this.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic.
An audio recording of a conversation between the two reveals Donald Trump admitted he intentionally downplayed the threat of COVID-19 back in early February. Bob Woodward says he recorded the interviews with the president's permission. The comments are coming to light as Woodward releases a new book on Donald Trump entitled Rage. It's not the only book that's coming out. Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, out this week with a new book as well, which we're going to get to. But let's bring in our guests. That is it, Disloyal, a memoir. Steve Farnsworth, Dan Casino are standing by, and we're going to start with this revelation. Steve, maybe you can go first here. Bob Woodward, Donald Trump knew the coronavirus was deadly, worse than the flu, misled Americans. What do you think?
Well, if this were any other president, I'd say the presidency would be basically over. When you lie to the public about something that ends up killing 180,000 Americans, you really have a huge, huge problem. What's more is that not only was he not playing, he was actively talking about how this was not a problem. He was also holding campaign rallies in crowded spaces, and so really endangering his own supporters, as well as not telling the truth to the country. It is an astonishing betrayal of public leadership. There's no other way to put it.
Dan?
What's really astonishing about this is that people are still talking to Bob Woodward, right? Bob Woodward, for the last 20 years, has been writing books about presidential administrations. Every single administration that has talked to him has been upset they talked to him. He hasn't written a book that they've been happy with. And still, he managed to get people to talk to him, including the President of the United States. And we're seeing a lot of finger-pointing inside the White House, not about the President's comments, but about the fact that the President and a whole bunch of people in his cabinet talked to Bob Woodward for this book and gave Bob Woodward all this sourcing. In the past, they've been able to deflect some of this negative coverage by saying it's anonymous sources. It's not true. The president has claimed that anonymous sources don't exist and it's all made up. But that's much harder to do when these are sources that are on the record. In fact, in the case of the president, on tape, doing what Woodward said he did. It's really a shocking failure on the part of the White House.
Is there a way out of this, Steve, for the president's supporters in the following manner? Listen, what I meant by that was I didn't want people to panic.
Well, certainly that's true, but that doesn't explain the campaign rallies. That doesn't explain people not wearing masks. It doesn't explain the way that the president really underestimated, told the public that this wasn't a problem going into not only March and April, but May and June and July. It's only in the last few weeks, mind you, that the president has been willing to wear the mask in public and has been talking to other people about engaging in safe distancing and other measures. This was described as a hoax from pretty much start to finish of this summer, and that is a significant departure. The way out of this for the president, of course, is to say that he was misquoted, that this was fake news, and to count on loyal voices in Washington undermining what is an extraordinarily damaging revelation.
Yeah, we're hearing from the White House exactly that, Dan, which is, he didn't want to create chaos.
Well, and look, this actually fits in reasonably well with what the president has been saying over the past couple weeks, which is that he always took the virus seriously, despite what he said early on. He says, I always took it seriously. The media just took me out of context. I knew how bad it was. And he says now, of course, he did an amazing job protecting Americans, and it's a huge success. So this almost fits with that revisionist narrative the president's putting forward, that he always knew how bad it was and was always taking steps in order to make it better. This is, of course, entirely at odds with the facts on the ground going back to March and April, but it certainly is what the president is now saying he always did.
Okay, so we've got Rage, this book by Bob Woodward. We also have the book from Michael Cohen, Disloyal, a memoir, the true story of the former personal attorney to President Donald Trump, in which Michael Cohen basically says Trump is a mobster and the family is basically a mafia family, and it's all about enriching themselves, and on it goes. Now, Michael Cohen's own record, of course, is questionable, but nevertheless, Steve, a bit of a pylon here going on. What do you think the impact will be?
Well, absolutely. You're right about this being a pylon. It's a bad time to be president in the months before an election when you're going up for re-election, because everybody who has a score to settle, this is the time to do it. With respect to Cohen, he's a much easier target, I think, for the Trump administration to attack. Cohen went to jail. He's a convicted felon. He lied to Congress. There are a whole series of ways that he can be dismissed as somebody who's got an axe to grind, somebody who's disloyal to the president, and so on. So I think that's going to have less of an impact. But Bob Woodward has a record for getting people to say amazing things and to being supported by the evidence that emerges subsequently, going all the way back to the Watergate scandals of the 1970s. And so I think that the larger impact is likely to be with respect to the Woodward book. But it is important to remember that most Americans have really made up their minds one way or the other about this president. There are not a lot of swing voters out there to persuade, but no doubt about it, the events of the last week is not favorable for persuading that sliver of voters that honestly doesn't know how they're going to vote in November.
Yeah, you know, Dan, we got this embarrassing book by the president's niece, Mary Trump. Now we've got the Woodward book, and we've got the Michael Cohen book. What impact do you think it's having? I mean, is it moving the needle at all?
It's not moving the needle, but the reason for it is because this has been a constant stream of negative news. Because the president is constantly under fire in the press, because all the news we hear about the president is negative, that keeps the president's approval ratings depressed, right? The president has a base level of support that's relatively higher than what his approval rating is now. If somehow magically we went 2 weeks without having any negative press coverage of the president, his approval ratings would be 5 or 6 or 7 points higher than they are right now. The fact that they are where they are is because there's this constant stream of negative news. And if the president wants to increase his numbers in advance of the election, he somehow has to get ahead of that and get positive coverage. But with this onslaught of negative campaign books, and Steve is absolutely right, it's just going to get worse as we get closer to the election. I don't see any way for him to do that, any way for him to get ahead of this and turn to the narrative he wants to be talking about.
Okay, speaking of the election, we're just going to show our viewers the map of some of these battleground states where Joe Biden is ahead. And the two of you know them well. Of course, Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Those are the big three, which, of course, Hillary Clinton lost and Donald Trump ended up becoming president. But also Arizona, interesting, North Carolina, and Florida. So, Steve Farnsworth, Biden ahead. And by the way, he has been ahead, as we know, for months in a lot of the national polls. Some of these battleground states, it's much closer, but nevertheless, he maintains his lead. Here we are, September the 9th. What do you think this will mean?
Well, I think that the poll numbers are pretty clear that you'd rather be Joe Biden than Donald Trump right now. But there is 2 months to go between now and the election, and there are all kinds of opportunities for presidents to change the narrative, to focus on another subject. I mean, there is one positive spin, of course, in terms of the conversation over the last few days of the Cohen book, for example. And that is that there hasn't been much of a conversation about COVID. That's changing now with the Woodward book. But any day that there is not a conversation in America about COVID and how the administration has handled it is a day that could have been worse for President Trump. So there are opportunities, as presidents know full well, to change the subject by focusing on some other thing.